What if I told you the next big AI story is not about apps, chips, or even robots? It is about your electricity bill. Because right now Silicon Valley is racing to build the future, and America may be the one paying to power it. The US already hit record electricity consumption in 2025, and the Energy Information Administration says power demand is expected to rise again in 2026 and 2027, driven in part by AI and crypto data centers. And here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. The companies building this AI boom may capture the upside, while households, small businesses, and local communities deal with the grid stress, infrastructure costs, and climate consequences. So the real question is not just whether AI is revolutionary. It is this: will America rebuild its power system for big tech? And who gets stuck with the bill? Let's make this simple. AI runs on data centers. Data centers run on electricity. A lot of it. And not just turn on the lights electricity. We are talking about giant server warehouses running day and night, pushing huge power loads into local grids that were never designed for this kind of demand. Because apparently, the cloud is actually just a very expensive warehouse with a fan problem. And this is moving fast, very fast. According to the IEA, data centers can be built in about 1 to 3 years, but new grid infrastructure can take 5 to 15 years to plan, permit, and complete. That mismatch is the entire story. Silicon Valley is sprinting. America's grid is limping. And when those two speeds collide, somebody pays. But before we get to the money, there is an even bigger twist. Because this is no longer just a tech story. It is becoming an American infrastructure story. For years, the US talked about winning the future through innovation. Build the chips, train the models, lead the AI race. Sounds great, but nobody really asked the least glamorous question in the room. Where exactly is all this power supposed to come from? And that is where the conflict begins. Data centers are popping up in states like Virginia, Texas, and Washington. And even the US government says it is still trying to understand how much electricity this sector is really using, launching pilot surveys in 2026 to track that energy demand more closely. That tells you something important. This boom is happening so quickly that even policymakers are still trying to measure it in real time. Meanwhile, Reuters reported that US electricity use from data centers could more than quadruple by the end of the decade and consume as much as 17% of US power supplies, based on EPRI research. 17%. That is not a side story. That is a national story. And the pressure is already showing. Grid operators are warning about supply shortfalls. Utilities are asking data centers to cut power use during peak demand. Some facilities are even being told to lean on backup generators during stress events. So if you thought AI was just changing search engines and office software, no. It may be changing how America plans power, permits infrastructure, and prices electricity. And now we get to the most controversial question of all. Who pays for the grid upgrades? Because expanding transmission, substations, backup generation, and grid capacity is not cheap. Utilities across the US are already ramping up spending plans to handle surging demand from data centers, and Reuters reported that companies like AEP, Exelon, Entergy, Southern Co., and CenterPoint have all been increasing infrastructure spending as this wave builds. Now, in theory, this sounds bullish. More demand, more investment, more grid modernization. Investors hear that and think, opportunity, and they are not wrong. Utilities, transmission builders, grid equipment suppliers, backup power companies, and even some nuclear names could become some of the hidden winners of the AI build-out. Big tech is already putting financial support behind next-generation nuclear projects as AI demand rises. But there is a catch, a big one. If these grid costs are socialized, meaning spread across the wider system, then ordinary ratepayers can end up carrying part of the burden. That is why this story matters. Not because AI uses power, because the cost of serving new large loads can become a political fight over who deserves priority, who funds the upgrades, and whether households should subsidize some part of the race. And Reuters reported that research from Duke University found that making data centers more flexible during peak demand could avoid $40 billion to $150 billion in capital investments over the next decade, potentially saving households and small businesses from taking on more grid build costs. Read that again. There is already research suggesting that without smarter management, the AI power boom could create tens of billions in extra infrastructure spending pressure. So this is not just a utility story. It is a ratepayer story. It is a public policy story. And yes, it is an investing story. But wait, the money is only one side of it. The climate side gets even messier. Because when power demand spikes faster than clean infrastructure can keep up, the system reaches for whatever is available. That can mean more natural gas in the near term. It can mean delaying retirements of dirtier plants. It can mean backup diesel generators humming during peak stress. It can mean communities being told to accept more infrastructure because the future depends on it. And suddenly the AI boom starts looking a lot less clean and a lot more complicated. One Reuters report this month showed how AI-driven power demand is already colliding with environmental goals in parts of the US, with officials citing grid reliability concerns as pollution rules are rolled back to keep power available for data centers. That is the contradiction. AI is marketed like a sleek digital future, but the physical reality looks like transmission lines, substations, water use, backup generators, and fights over land pollution and reliability. So for younger American viewers, especially anyone who cares about climate and investing, this is the real takeaway. The next phase of the economy is not only about software, it is about physical systems. The companies that win may not just be the flashy AI names. They may be the overlooked backbone companies that quietly make the whole machine run. And that changes how you think about sustainable investing, because now the question becomes, do you invest only in the digital winners? Or do you look at the grid enablers, demand response players, clean, firm power, storage, and infrastructure companies that solve the bottleneck? That is where this story becomes exciting, because crises create pressure. Pressure creates spending. Then spending creates investable themes, but only if you can separate hype from actual infrastructure value. And here is the cliffhanger nobody likes to say out loud. If America wants to win the AI race, it may have to choose what it is willing to tolerate: higher costs, more grid build-out, more local resistance, more gas in the short term, or a much faster push into nuclear, storage, and flexible power systems. That is not a tech decision. That is a national economic decision. So let's bring this back to the big question. Silicon Valley wants more power. That part is obvious. The less obvious part is what comes next. Does America modernize the grid fast enough? Do utilities turn this into a growth story without crushing affordability? Do data centers become flexible enough to reduce the burden? Do clean energy and nuclear scale fast enough to keep this from becoming a climate setback? Or does the country quietly hand big tech the power it wants and send the costs somewhere else? Because that is how big systems usually work. The upside gets privatized, the strain gets distributed. And that is why this story matters so much. Not because AI is futuristic, but because the infrastructure behind it is old, expensive, political, and impossible to ignore. The next AI battle may not be fought in chatbots. It may be fought in utility commissions, state houses, grid queues, and electricity markets. That is where the real future economy gets built. And the investors who understand that early may see something the market still treats like background noise. So no, this is not just a story about servers. It is a story about who gets powered first. And in America, that is always a story about money. If you want more climate and future economy breakdowns with the investing angle built in, subscribe to The Climate Ledger. Because the biggest opportunities and risks are usually hiding behind the headlines.